For decades, Rob Reiner was regarded as one of Hollywood's most dependable figures, a director who shaped classics like When Harry Met Sally and A Few Good Men. He carried a reputation for professionalism, creativity, and an approachable demeanor. Publicly, his life appeared stable. At his side stood Michele Reiner, a woman whose presence was always supportive but understated. Their marriage, as reported in magazines and glimpsed at charity events, seemed almost perfect, loving, quiet, and resistant to the chaos of Hollywood's glaring spotlight. But what the public never knew, and what Rob Reiner himself revealed in one final, private confession, would shatter that perception entirely. Those close to the couple noticed subtle shifts in the months leading up to this confession. Rob, always the animated storyteller, began speaking cautiously when Michele's name surfaced. There was a hesitation, almost a weight in his voice, as though every word carried decades of unspoken truths. In the final conversation he ever shared about his marriage, never intended for public release, he admitted a painful reality. It wasn't scandalous, at least not in the conventional sense of Hollywood tabloids. It was far more unsettling, a revelation of emotional distance, miscommunication, and the cost of a life consumed by ambition. Their marriage did not start under the glare of limelight or through opportunistic connections. Rob and Michele's bond was built on mutual respect, shared values, and a quiet determination to shield their private life from the relentless machinery of Hollywood. Michele, it was clear, was drawn to purpose rather than fame. She valued personal fulfillment, philanthropy, and stability. Reiner, already immersed in the demands of a successful career, found in her a grounding force, someone who did not orbit his achievements but offered calm, unwavering support. In the early years, friends described their union as functional in the most admirable sense. Routines that preserved harmony, boundaries that maintained privacy, and a deliberate effort to keep professional pressures from invading their home. But Hollywood is relentless, and walls, no matter how carefully constructed, inevitably erode. Career commitments began to intrude on personal life incrementally. Film projects demanded long hours. Promotional tours required constant presence, and public appearances became obligations that left little room for personal connection. Observers noted that conversations that once lasted for hours gradually became concise exchanges. Not arguments, not overt conflicts, but efficiency, a subtle, insidious form of distance that often goes unnoticed until it has fully reshaped the relationship. Rob Reiner confessed that he mistakenly equated stability with intimacy. He assumed that the absence of dramatic conflict indicated a healthy partnership. In truth, Michele had quietly begun to withdraw. There were no explosive fights, no screaming headlines, just silence that grew heavier with each passing year. In their world, the absence of argument did not signify peace. It signified an unspoken separation. While the public believed in a flawless marriage, privately, the emotional space between them widened. He recalled dinners where he was physically present but mentally preoccupied, rehearsing film edits or planning the next day's schedule in his mind. Long drives home were spent considering hypothetical conversations he no longer knew how to initiate. Michele, perceptive and patient, adapted by occupying her own space, pursuing interests in philanthropic work, and gradually accepting the life they shared as one of companionship rather than closeness. This quiet drift, Reiner admitted, was the cost of prioritizing professional output over emotional engagement. The most striking aspect of his confession was his awareness of the consequences of neglect. Rob understood, perhaps too late, that love is not preserved through absence or avoidance. He had protected the marriage from visible conflict, but in doing so, he allowed the very foundation of intimacy to erode. Michele's acceptance of the relationship's evolving shape, her quiet endurance, her subtle retreat, was a testament to her resilience and understanding. Rob, in contrast, realized the depth of his own failings only after decades of unexamined behavior. In that confession, he did not seek sympathy or absolution. He did not blame Michele, nor did he lament Hollywood. Instead, he blamed himself, the version of himself that believed success could replace presence, that productivity could substitute for attention, that career triumphs could compensate for emotional neglect. He admitted that he had loved Michele in his way, but that love had been incomplete, filtered through the lens of professional obsession and public expectation. What made this confession transformative was its clarity, the acknowledgement that relationships do not require overt drama to dissolve. Intimacy can wane quietly, nearly imperceptibly, leaving only the semblance of partnership. Rob's admission reframed his entire life narrative. It was no longer a story of a stable Hollywood marriage, but a cautionary tale of what happens when love is assumed rather than actively nurtured. This revelation also shifted the public perception of Rob Reiner himself. No longer just a brilliant filmmaker or cultural icon, he became a figure of introspection, a man confronting the hidden consequences of a life devoted to craft at the expense of connection. His confession was raw, honest, and profoundly human. It reminded those who admired him that even figures of public admiration faced the quiet tragedies of neglect, absence, and unspoken truths. As the final words of his confession echoed, it became clear that the story of Rob and Michele was not about failure in the conventional sense. It was about the subtle, often invisible compromises that life imposes, the cost of prioritizing career over emotional presence, and the courage it takes to admit one's own mistakes. It was a revelation that reshaped the understanding of a marriage that had seemed flawless, exposing a nuanced and deeply emotional truth that few had ever suspected. And that truth, quietly revealed at the end of a long life and illustrious career, was only the beginning. The public never saw the private fractures forming over the years, and perhaps that was the point. Rob's confession revealed that the most profound ruptures in life are often invisible, occurring not in the glare of cameras or headlines, but in quiet moments, in the spaces where attention should have been given and was not. He described mornings when Michele would rise before him, preparing for the day silently, while he lingered in thought over scripts, contracts, and schedules. There was no resentment in her demeanor, only a patient acknowledgement of the reality they had built together. Rob admitted that he mistook this acceptance for contentment, failing to realize that stability without engagement is a fragile illusion. Friends and colleagues had always envied the Reiners' marriage. It was photographed at charity galas, celebrated at industry events, and cited as a model of longevity in a business known for volatile unions. But behind the applause and the smiles lay years of subtle disconnection. Reiner spoke about conversations that never happened, questions left unasked, stories never shared, moments of intimacy lost to routine. He admitted that these silent omissions accumulated, shaping a marriage that looked whole on the surface but had begun to hollow from the inside. In the confession, Reiner recounted one evening that changed his perspective entirely. He and Michele had returned from a gala, the city lights reflecting off the car windows. For a fleeting moment, she reached for his hand, and he realized he had not felt the warmth of her presence for years. It was not a dramatic scene. There was no argument, no confrontation, only the quiet recognition of absence. That hand, warm and patient, was a reminder of all the small emotional investments he had neglected. It was a revelation of the human cost of a life lived in motion, chasing deadlines and accolades while ignoring the quiet, irreplaceable rhythms of shared life. Rob also spoke candidly about guilt, not the performative guilt of a public apology, but the deep, personal guilt that comes from knowing you have failed someone you love without malice, simply through neglect. He described nights lying awake, thinking about conversations that would never happen, realizing that his presence had often been more about obligation than connection. He acknowledged that Michele had adapted, not out of indifference, but out of necessity, creating her own life within the framework of their marriage, quietly maintaining her sense of self while allowing their partnership to persist in form but not in emotional substance. The confession extended to Hollywood itself, though not an accusation. Rob acknowledged that the industry demands a kind of self-abandonment, where personal relationships are secondary to reputation, output, and visibility. Yet he admitted his own complicity, recognizing that he could have chosen differently, that he could have prioritized presence over performance. He reflected on how fame and career, when unbalanced by mindfulness, can consume the very connections that give life meaning. Michele, he realized, had been giving, adapting, and forgiving in ways that allowed him to continue his work without confrontation. He also reflected on the lessons of silence. The absence of conflict, he admitted, had lulled him into complacency. He believed that as long as there were no arguments, there was stability. But the truth he revealed was far more unsettling. Relationships deteriorate not only through confrontation, but through neglect, through the failure to engage, to inquire, to witness the other's inner life. Michele's quiet endurance had preserved their public image, but it had not preserved the depth of intimacy they once shared. Reiner's confession highlighted a paradox of long-term love, that the very traits that sustain it, patience, restraint, understanding, can also mask a slow erosion when one partner withdraws. He described the pain of realizing that his good intentions, his effort to protect the marriage from drama, had inadvertently contributed to its quiet diminishment. He acknowledged that he had underestimated Michele's need for presence, for engagement, for recognition, not as a public figure, not as a director, but as a partner, a human being deserving of undivided attention. In recounting these truths, Rob's words painted a picture not of failure, but of tragic honesty. He did not seek sympathy, he sought understanding. His confession was a gift to those who admire him, a raw and unflinching look at the consequences of prioritizing career over connection. He described the difficulty of living with the realization that one can love profoundly, yet imperfectly, that intentions, no matter how noble, cannot substitute for attentive presence. Friends who heard the confession reported a man deeply reflective, not bitter. There was sorrow, certainly, but also acceptance. Rob recognized that life is made up of choices, and that some choices, while logical or necessary at the time, carry unintended costs. He spoke of Michele with profound respect, acknowledging her resilience, her adaptability, and her quiet strength. She had lived beside him for decades, shaping a life that balanced both partnership and individuality, and her influence had been more formative than he had ever fully appreciated. As he spoke, the narrative of Rob Reiner shifted from that of a Hollywood director known for professional brilliance to a human being grappling with universal truths, the impermanence of connection, the consequences of neglect, and the bittersweet nature of love that endures in form, but not in full intimacy. It was a story that resonated beyond Hollywood, touching anyone who has experienced the quiet unraveling of relationships through inattention rather than malice. The final confession left a haunting lesson. Love requires active participation, vigilance, and honesty. Stability alone cannot sustain it. Recognition, engagement, and emotional presence are essential. And even for someone like Rob Reiner, whose life was filled with public admiration and professional success, the most challenging truths were those lived quietly, in the heart of a marriage that appeared perfect to the world, yet concealed the tender vulnerabilities of two souls navigating the complexities of love, commitment, and human imperfection. In the wake of his final confession, those closest to Rob Reiner began to reassess the couple's life through a new lens. Friends, collaborators, and even distant acquaintances admitted that while they had long admired the Reiners as a model Hollywood couple, few could claim to understand the complexities hidden beneath the surface. Rob's revelations sparked a quiet reckoning. How often do public figures maintain appearances while concealing the deep, often invisible strains of their private lives? In sharing his truth, he provided a rare glimpse into the emotional cost of success and the compromises made silently over decades. Rob spoke candidly about the delicate balance of life in Hollywood, where visibility is currency and personal connections are often secondary. He described the subtle pressures that accompanied his career: premieres, press obligations, and social functions that required not only attendance but charisma. Each commitment, while seemingly minor, drew time and emotional energy away from the marriage. Michele, by contrast, had learned to navigate this reality with grace. She developed routines, cultivated passions outside their shared life, and quietly accommodated the demands of her husband's career. From the outside, this looked like perfect harmony. In truth, it was a delicate dance of endurance and compromise. Friends recounted that Rob began noticing these patterns only late in life. He recalled a dinner party where the tension in casual exchanges became almost palpable. Michele was present but distant, engaged in polite conversation while her mind seemed elsewhere. Rob, usually perceptive, suddenly recognized that these small cues, once dismissed as fatigue or distraction, were indicators of a deeper emotional gap. It was not a question of love lost, but love altered. The intimacy that had once defined their bond had been replaced by a careful, functional coexistence. One particularly poignant memory that Rob shared involved a quiet evening at home, long after the clamor of Hollywood events had subsided. Michele suggested a walk in the garden, a simple gesture of connection. For the first time in years, Rob noticed the weight of years in her posture, the subtle hints of compromise and adaptation. He realized that Michele had adjusted to his absences, to the professional demands that occupied his mind, and that she had found ways to live fully even while sharing a life with a man often emotionally elsewhere. The clarity of that moment left him unsettled. He admitted that the realization, though painful, was transformative. It forced him to confront the consequences of years of well-intentioned neglect. Rob's confession also addressed the broader implications of silence in relationships. He spoke of the danger of assuming stability equates to intimacy, and how the absence of visible conflict can mask profound emotional distance. Michele's quietness, which he once interpreted as patience and contentment, was actually a protective strategy, an effort to maintain harmony while allowing space for her own needs. Rob reflected on how easy it is for two people to coexist without truly engaging, to perform the roles expected of them, while the emotional landscape shifts imperceptibly beneath the surface. Colleagues and friends noted that Rob's acknowledgement of these truths was accompanied by deep remorse, but also by gratitude. He admired Michele's resilience, recognizing that her ability to navigate their life together with dignity and grace had been a stabilizing force. Even in the face of his own shortcomings, she preserved the essence of their shared existence, creating a life that allowed both of them to continue despite the quiet erosion of intimacy. Rob described this realization as both humbling and enlightening, emphasizing the rare courage it takes to live with grace when faced with unspoken disappointment. In recounting his final confession, Rob made it clear that his reflections were not about blame, but about awareness. He understood that emotional presence cannot be substituted with financial support, social appearances, or professional accomplishments. Love, he admitted, requires active engagement, constant care, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. Michele had demonstrated these qualities in ways that were nearly invisible, and it was only in his final years that he fully recognized the depth of her contribution, not only to their marriage, but to his understanding of human connection. He also addressed the subtle tragedy of misaligned perception. Outsiders, including the media, industry peers, and fans, had long assumed that the Reiners' marriage was flawless. Rob's confession challenged this narrative, illustrating how easily appearances can deceive. The truth, he acknowledged, is rarely spectacular or sensational. It is often found in small, quiet acts of compromise, in patience extended without recognition, and in love expressed through endurance rather than overt gestures. The emotional resonance of his confession was magnified by its honesty. Rob did not seek sympathy or redemption. He sought understanding. He described the tension between professional achievement and personal connection, the difficulty of reconciling ambition with intimacy, and the subtle, cumulative costs of neglect. By sharing these reflections, he invited others to examine their own relationships, to recognize the importance of presence, and to appreciate the quiet acts that sustain long-term bonds. Ultimately, Rob's final confession reframed not only his marriage, but his entire life narrative. It revealed a man capable of deep self-reflection, a man willing to confront uncomfortable truths, and a man who recognized that the most meaningful elements of life are often hidden from public view. His words left an indelible impression. Love is not defined by appearances, nor sustained by intention alone. It is nurtured through constant engagement, awareness, and the courage to act with honesty and empathy. As the story of Rob and Michele unfolded through this confession, it became a profound lesson in human connection, a reminder that even lives lived in the spotlight are subject to the quiet, universal challenges of love, presence, and understanding. The revelations would echo far beyond Hollywood, resonating with anyone who has grappled with the delicate balance of professional ambition and personal devotion, and illuminating the often invisible labor required to sustain meaningful relationships over a lifetime. The confession had ripple effects that extended beyond Rob and Michele's inner circle. Friends and colleagues began to reflect on moments they had witnessed but never fully understood. Industry peers who had always admired the Reiners' seemingly unshakable partnership began to realize that much of what they had assumed as harmony was, in fact, a careful orchestration of appearances. Rob's openness about his own emotional absence, and Michele's quiet endurance, shed light on a dynamic that had gone largely unspoken. The intricate balancing act required to maintain a marriage under the constant scrutiny of Hollywood. Rob recounted how even his closest collaborators had noticed subtle shifts in his demeanor over the years. He would arrive on set physically present but emotionally distant, carrying the weight of unaddressed personal truths. Crew members, noticing a distracted director or a partner lost in thought, assumed stress related to film production. Few understood the undercurrent of private struggle, the quiet awareness that his marriage, while outwardly stable, was experiencing an erosion of intimacy. Rob admitted that he had underestimated the perceptiveness of those around him, not realizing that silence can communicate more than words ever could. One friend recalled a particular film premiere years earlier where Rob and Michele appeared together on the red carpet. Everyone smiled for the cameras, the photographs capturing the illusion of connection. Yet backstage, in the quiet moments away from flashbulbs, Michele had expressed subtle disappointment, her own way of signaling that something essential was missing. Rob, caught up in the whirlwind of interviews and public expectations, had failed to register the gravity of her sentiment. In hindsight, he recognized this as a defining pattern. Gestures that could have fostered communication were overlooked, and small gaps in attention grew over time into a profound emotional distance. In his final confession, Rob also addressed the profound psychological weight of unspoken truths. He spoke of nights lying awake, contemplating the impact of years of emotional absence. He reflected on the irony that in protecting their marriage from confrontation, he had inadvertently allowed it to erode. Michele, ever patient, had adapted, learning to coexist with his divided attention and to nurture her own life alongside his. Rob described the realization as both devastating and enlightening. Devastating for the years lost to neglect, and enlightening in that it revealed the quiet, resilient strength of his partner. Rob detailed specific instances where he had recognized the costs of this distance. Family holidays, casual conversations, and everyday routines. All were occasions where emotional engagement should have been prioritized. Instead, he admitted he often prioritized work, social obligations, or personal reflection over genuine connection. Michele, he observed, had accommodated this without complaint, demonstrating an extraordinary capacity for empathy and patience. These realizations, he acknowledged, brought a sense of shame, but also a deeper appreciation for the unwavering commitment she had shown over decades. The confession extended beyond personal reflection to broader insights about human relationships. Rob observed that the most insidious threats to intimacy are not dramatic conflicts or betrayals, but subtle neglect and inattention. Love requires consistent effort, attentiveness, and a willingness to engage with the other person's emotional world. Michele's quiet strength had masked the gradual erosion of intimacy, but it had not eliminated it. Rob's acknowledgement of this truth became a powerful testament to the importance of active participation in sustaining meaningful relationships. Friends and family noted that Rob's humility in sharing these revelations was remarkable. He did not seek to justify his behavior or minimize the consequences of his absence. He simply wanted to convey the lessons he had learned. His reflections served as both apology and guidance, highlighting the ways in which even the most successful individuals can fail in their most intimate relationships if they do not remain vigilant. The confession underscored the idea that love is not static, but dynamic, requiring attention, presence, and responsiveness throughout the course of a lifetime. Rob also shared the bittersweet acknowledgement that while some consequences of neglect could not be undone, understanding them allowed for a new perspective. He described moments of connection with Michele in later years, where small gestures, conversations, and shared laughter became profoundly meaningful precisely because they were recognized as fragile and precious. These moments, he emphasized, were a reminder that reconciliation, understanding, and appreciation can exist even after years of unacknowledged distance. Through this confession, Rob redefined the narrative of his marriage. It was no longer a story defined by public appearances, professional success, or perceived harmony. Instead, it became a story of human vulnerability, the quiet compromises inherent in long-term partnerships, and the extraordinary resilience of love maintained in the face of personal shortcomings. Michele's role, once largely invisible to the public, was brought into sharp relief. A partner who navigated life with patience, adaptability, and unwavering commitment, ensuring that their marriage endured even when emotional engagement waned. Ultimately, Rob Reiner's confession served as both personal catharsis and universal lesson. It illuminated the often unseen labor required to sustain relationships, the dangers of assuming that absence can coexist with intimacy, and the necessity of confronting uncomfortable truths with honesty and courage. His story resonated beyond Hollywood, touching anyone who has experienced the quiet strains of long-term commitment and the delicate balance between ambition and presence. As Part 4 closes, the portrait of Rob and Michele's life becomes more nuanced, revealing that love, while enduring, is fragile. It demands awareness, care, and consistent engagement. And even for someone like Rob Reiner, whose life was public and celebrated, the most meaningful truths were those lived in private. Lessons of connection, presence, and understanding that only emerge through reflection, honesty, and the courage to confess what has long remained hidden. As Rob Reiner's confession continued to circulate among those closest to him, the narrative began to shift. People who had long admired the Reiners as a model couple started to reassess their understanding, realizing that what appeared seamless on the surface often masked a complex, nuanced reality. In Hollywood, where appearances are everything, the pressure to maintain a flawless public image can be both a shield and a prison. For Rob and Michele, the facade of perfection had endured for decades, concealing both resilience and subtle, persistent emotional gaps. In Part 5, Rob delved deeper into the personal consequences of years of quiet emotional neglect. He spoke of countless days when he had prioritized film schedules, meetings, and public appearances over the private moments that truly sustain a marriage. He admitted that Michele, ever patient and observant, had adapted to this reality, filling her own life with meaning while continuing to offer the emotional stability that allowed him to thrive professionally. She had become, in his words, the quiet hero of our life together, managing the delicate balance of love, partnership, and personal fulfillment in a way that was largely invisible to everyone but Rob himself. One of the most striking aspects of his confession was his recognition of the small, almost imperceptible signs of emotional distance that he had ignored for years. Simple gestures, a hand left unheld, a conversation deferred, a glance that lingered on the periphery, had accumulated, forming a subtle but significant shift in the dynamics of their relationship. These moments, he realized too late, were not trivial. They were indicators of the deep, underlying needs that had been left unmet. Rob described the profound regret that came with recognizing how easily silence and absence could be mistaken for harmony, and how those very absences can quietly reshape a life together. Rob also reflected on the broader lessons of his experience. He admitted that his confession was not just about his marriage, but about understanding the essential human need for presence and attentiveness. He spoke candidly about the illusions of success and fame, acknowledging that professional achievement, accolades, and public recognition cannot replace the fundamental work required to maintain intimate human relationships. Michele's quiet commitment had provided structure, continuity, and emotional scaffolding, but had also highlighted what he had failed to give in return: presence, engagement, and vulnerability. Friends who witnessed the confession were moved by Rob's honesty. They noted that, for the first time, he seemed fully aware of the ways in which his choices had shaped not only his own life, but the life of his partner. Rob acknowledged that this awareness, while painful, offered a form of redemption, a chance to express appreciation, to recognize her resilience, and to attempt, in the final chapters of his life, to close the gap that had existed for decades. It was a recognition that even imperfect love, when acknowledged and valued, could have profound meaning. Rob's reflection extended to specific memories and shared experiences. He recalled quiet evenings when he had been distracted by work, missing subtle cues of Michele's moods and needs. He remembered conversations postponed, moments of tenderness left unspoken, and the slow accumulation of distance that had silently reshaped their relationship. Yet in recounting these memories, he also highlighted Michele's adaptability and grace. She had never demanded attention or dramatized her discontent. Instead, she had quietly ensured the continuity of their partnership, demonstrating a strength that was largely invisible to the outside world. The confession also touched on the interplay between public image and private reality. Rob admitted that the pressures of Hollywood had amplified the challenges inherent in any long-term relationship. He described the relentless demands of film production, media appearances, and social obligations, all of which required a level of emotional investment that often came at the expense of personal connection. Michele, he said, navigated these pressures with remarkable poise, creating a life that balanced both the demands of public life and the necessity of private fulfillment. Rob's reflections culminated in an acknowledgement of the bittersweet nature of love and commitment. He recognized that even the most enduring relationships are subject to the forces of time, distance, and circumstance. Yet he also emphasized the resilience inherent in true partnership, the capacity to endure, to adapt, and to find meaning in connection even when it is imperfect. His confession served not only as an apology, but as a profound meditation on the nature of human intimacy, the importance of presence, and the enduring value of recognition, appreciation, and vulnerability. As Part 5 draws to a close, the portrait of Rob and Michele Reiner emerges as both cautionary and inspiring. It is a story of love shaped by ambition, endurance, and the quiet sacrifices that define long-term partnership. Rob's confession illuminates the invisible labor that sustains marriage, the subtle ways in which neglect can accumulate, and the extraordinary resilience of a partner who navigates life with grace and patience. The narrative resonates far beyond Hollywood. offering lessons on human connection, the cost of absence, and the profound significance of presence in sustaining love across decades. Ultimately, Rob Reiner's final confession does more than recount a personal history. It transforms the understanding of a life lived in the public eye, revealing that even amidst fame and professional achievement, the most meaningful truths often reside in the quiet, private spaces of human relationships. His words remind us that love, attention, and presence are not optional. They are essential. And it is in acknowledging our own failings, appreciating the resilience of those we love, and striving to engage fully in the lives of others that we discover the deepest and most enduring forms of connection. As Rob Reiner's final confession unfolded, those closest to him began to grasp the full emotional weight of his revelations. Friends who had known the Reiners for decades described a mixture of shock and admiration. Shock at the candid acknowledgement of private struggles that had long gone unseen, and admiration for the courage it took to confront those truths publicly. In a world where Hollywood marriages are often reduced to scandal or sensationalism, Rob's honesty provided a rare, unvarnished insight into the realities of long-term commitment under relentless public scrutiny. Rob spoke at length about the nuances of emotional labor and the often invisible contributions of his wife, Michele. She had maintained the household, managed relationships, and created a sense of continuity for their family, all while allowing Rob to pursue the demanding schedule of a celebrated filmmaker. In doing so, she had shaped a partnership that could endure the pressures of Hollywood fame, yet the cost of her quiet resilience had been largely unrecognized until Rob's late-in-life confession. He admitted that he had long mistaken her patience and adaptability for contentment, failing to fully engage in the emotional reciprocity that sustains intimacy. One poignant moment Rob recounted involved a private discussion in their home library, late at night. Michele had gently expressed feelings of distance, not in anger or accusation, but with a quiet plea for acknowledgement. Rob described the scene as both humbling and awakening. For the first time, he understood that love is not only about presence in the physical sense, but also about attentive, conscious engagement. He realized that years of assuming stability equated to intimacy had created an emotional gap that could have been bridged with deliberate effort long before it became pronounced. Friends in the film industry noted that Rob's confession was unprecedented. While many celebrities have spoken of challenges in their private lives, few have offered such an introspective, detailed account of emotional absence and personal accountability. Colleagues described him as a man grappling with profound self-awareness, someone who could confront not only his own shortcomings, but also the consequences of decades of inattention to his most intimate relationship. This level of honesty, they remarked, was both rare and courageous, particularly in a culture that often prizes image over authenticity. Rob also addressed the broader implications of his story. He reflected on how easily public perception can diverge from private reality. The Reiners were long viewed as a perfect Hollywood couple, admired for their apparent harmony and stability. Yet the truth, as Rob revealed, was far more complex. He described how love can persist despite neglect, how partnership can survive through endurance, and how even the most subtle emotional absences can accumulate over time. His confession became a meditation on the human condition, illustrating that relationships are sustained not only through grand gestures, but also through consistent, attentive presence. Michele herself, according to friends, responded with quiet grace to Rob's revelations. She acknowledged the sacrifices she had made, but also the love and patience that had allowed their marriage to endure. In interviews and private conversations, she emphasized that while the relationship had faced challenges, the years of partnership had also been filled with moments of profound connection, laughter, and shared accomplishment. Her perspective reinforced Rob's acknowledgement that love requires effort, empathy, and vulnerability, and that even relationships with deep flaws can hold enduring value when both partners recognize and respect each other's contributions. Rob's reflection extended to the lessons he hoped others would take from his experiences. He emphasized that emotional presence cannot be delegated or deferred. Career success, public acclaim, and personal achievements, while important, cannot replace the investment required to sustain intimate human bonds. Michele's patience and adaptability had preserved the marriage's form, but it was only through acknowledgement, active engagement, and vulnerability that its substance could be fully appreciated. His story became both a cautionary tale and a source of insight for anyone navigating the delicate balance between ambition and personal connection. Colleagues, friends, and family described a man transformed by reflection. Rob's confession was not simply a recounting of past mistakes. It was an active engagement with the emotional consequences of his choices. He demonstrated a rare ability to confront uncomfortable truths, to articulate the subtle dynamics of neglect and endurance, and to honor the quiet, unrecognized labor of his partner. In doing so, he reframed the narrative of his marriage, shifting it from one of public admiration to one of intimate, nuanced human experience. As the confession concluded, the overarching message became clear. Love is not maintained by absence or assumption, but by conscious, continuous participation. Even in the spotlight of fame, the most meaningful aspects of life reside in the private, often unseen moments of connection. Rob Reiner's final confession illuminated the profound truth that relationships require vigilance, empathy, and the courage to face one's own shortcomings. It was a story not only of regret and reflection, but also of admiration and respect for the enduring strength of a partner, for the lessons of presence, and for the enduring capacity of love to persist even amidst imperfection. In closing, Part 6 underscored the full arc of Rob and Michele's marriage. The story, now laid bare, revealed the invisible dynamics of endurance, the subtle consequences of neglect, and the extraordinary resilience required to sustain love over decades. Rob's confession became a testament to the power of honesty, the importance of presence, and the enduring human need for connection, leaving a legacy that extends far beyond Hollywood fame. His words serve as a reminder that even in lives lived under the public eye, the most profound truths are those discovered in private, through reflection, empathy, and the courage to confront one's own limitations. As the final chapter of his confession unfolded, Rob Reiner reflected not only on the past, but also on the legacy of his life and marriage. He acknowledged that fame, career accomplishments, and public recognition had all shaped his journey, but none of these could replace the quiet, intimate work required to sustain a lifelong partnership. Michele had been more than a spouse. She had been a stabilizing force, a mirror reflecting both his strengths and his shortcomings. In his own words, the ultimate revelation of his life was the realization of how much he had relied on her endurance, without fully reciprocating the emotional presence she deserved. Friends, colleagues, and family described Rob as profoundly transformed in these last reflections. His confession was suffused with humility and clarity, stripping away the curated image of a Hollywood icon to reveal a man capable of deep introspection. He spoke candidly about moments of regret, dinners unattended in mind, though present in body, long drives spent contemplating scripts instead of shared conversation, and evenings where silence had replaced meaningful engagement. Yet he also celebrated the resilience, patience, and quiet wisdom of Michele, whose ability to navigate life alongside him had been both selfless and extraordinary. Rob recounted specific memories that illustrated the subtle, everyday challenges of maintaining intimacy in a life dominated by professional demands. He described mornings where Michele prepared breakfast in silence, evenings when her hand would seek his yet go unnoticed, and holidays that passed without true conversation. Each of these moments, seemingly trivial to outsiders, carried weight in shaping the trajectory of their emotional connection. He recognized that these small acts of endurance were not simply habits, but lifelines that allowed their partnership to persist despite the years of inadvertent neglect. The confession also explored the broader lessons Rob had learned about love, commitment, and human connection. He emphasized that relationships require not only presence, but engagement, not only fidelity, but attentiveness, and not only love, but conscious care. Michele's patience had been a form of active love, demonstrating the quiet labor often invisible in public life. Rob admitted that it had taken decades to fully comprehend the magnitude of her contributions and the subtle consequences of his own inattention. This awareness, while painful, brought clarity and a renewed appreciation for the dynamics of partnership. Hollywood peers noted the rare vulnerability in Rob's final words. In an industry that often prizes image over authenticity, he laid bare the intimate, unvarnished truths of a marriage that had endured but not without cost. His reflections underscored the universal nature of these experiences, the tension between ambition and presence, the challenge of balancing professional achievement with personal intimacy, and the enduring human need for recognition and emotional responsiveness. In sharing these truths, Rob transcended the role of celebrity to offer a profound meditation on life, love, and responsibility. One of the most poignant aspects of this final part was Rob's acknowledgement of hope and redemption. While he confessed to years of emotional distance, he also highlighted moments of connection that had persisted and, in some cases, deepened in later years. Simple gestures, shared laughter over a quiet meal, long walks in the garden, moments of mutual understanding, became profoundly meaningful because they were recognized as fragile, precious, and deliberately nurtured. These acts, he reflected, demonstrated that love can endure, adapt, and even flourish when met with awareness and intention, despite the imperfections of the past. Michele's perspective, shared privately with close friends, reinforced the depth of their mutual understanding. She spoke of a marriage not as a series of failures, but as a continuous negotiation between two people committed to sustaining a life together amidst the pressures of fame, work, and public scrutiny. Her reflections emphasized resilience, grace, and the capacity to hold space for a partner's growth while also maintaining one's own identity. Rob's confession, she acknowledged, validated the emotional labor she had performed quietly over decades, highlighting the significance of her role in their shared journey. As the confession drew to a close, Rob reflected on the broader implications of his story for anyone navigating long-term relationships. He urged attention, presence, and deliberate engagement, stressing that love cannot be sustained by assumption, neglect, or silence. The lessons he shared about empathy, emotional awareness, and mutual respect were intended not only for those within Hollywood, but for anyone seeking to understand the subtleties of partnership. His words illuminated the hidden dynamics of marriage, emphasizing that enduring connection requires active, continuous participation and acknowledgement of the other's humanity. Ultimately, Part 7 served as both a conclusion and a reflection, synthesizing the narrative of Rob and Michele's life together. The story, now fully revealed, highlighted the challenges of sustaining intimacy amid professional demands, the quiet resilience required to preserve a long-term relationship, and the profound importance of emotional presence. Rob's confession transformed the understanding of his marriage from a public symbol of stability to a deeply human story of love, compromise, and personal growth. In the final analysis, the saga of Rob Reiner and Michele Reiner became a testament to the enduring, often unseen labor of love. It reminded audiences that even lives lived in the limelight are subject to the same vulnerabilities, mistakes, and lessons as anyone else's. Fame cannot replace attentiveness. Success cannot substitute for presence. And the most meaningful truths are often those discovered in private reflection. Rob Reiner's confession, at once candid, humble, and profoundly human, offered a lasting legacy, a call to cherish presence, nurture connection, and honor the quiet, persistent work that sustains love across a lifetime.